This truck wasn't faster, but it was smarter, and back in 1930, if you were hauling stuff, that mattered. Hi there, Rick DeBrule with another chapter on the automotive evolution, or should I say the truck evolution, with this 1930 International 6-speed. As usual, I'm here at the Martin Auto Museum in Phoenix. You know, this is a great collection with more than 180 cars and trucks, each of which have an important place in the American automotive journey. But before we talk about the importance of this International right here, I want to make sure you like and subscribe. And in the comments down below, let me know what I got right and let me know what I got wrong. There's always something I get wrong. And more importantly, let me know your International story. Have you ever driven in a truck like this? Any of those Internationals? Did your family have an International truck? Maybe a Travelall or a Scout? You know, your comments are very important. In fact, I always learn new things from your experiences. All right, before we dive in and talk about the importance of this truck right here, this International 6-speed, we have to take a brief moment to explain the history of International trucks. The roots of International go all the way back to 1834. That's when Cyrus McCormick, you remember him, he got the first patent for a horse-drawn reaping machine. In 1902, his company merged with several other companies to form International Harvester. That was right when motorized vehicles were starting to replace the horse-drawn wagons on farms. In 1907, the company introduced its first motor truck. It was called the Auto Buggy, and it actually could be converted for hauling either passengers or, well, whatever needed to be hauled. Farmers liked them for carrying crops, equipment, and goods over short distances. During the 1910s, the International company expanded its truck lineup to include a range of sizes and capacities. The company emphasized strength and reliability, offering trucks that were suited for rural roads, because they had a lot of bad roads back then, construction work, and industrial use. By the 1920s, International Harvester was a major player in the commercial truck market. Advances in transmissions, braking systems, and suspension reflected the growing demands of longer distance hauling and heavier loads. All right, now let's talk about this truck right here and how it had an advantage that made it especially important for anyone who wanted to haul heavy loads back in the 1930s. You see, in the late 20s and the early 30s, truck manufacturers were searching for ways to move heavy loads more efficiently over mixed terrain, bad roads. You know, the roads really varied wildly in quality, and engines, well, they would produce limited power compared to what was going to happen later on. International Harvester addressed this problem by experimenting with gearing rather than horsepower. This 6-speed special truck was built around a conventional gasoline 4-cylinder engine, but its defining feature was its drivetrain. It used a conventional 3-speed transmission like many trucks did back then, but it was mated to an Eaton 2-speed rear axle. It essentially turned that 3-speed transmission into a 6-speed operation. The additional gear ratios allowed drivers to keep the engine operating in a usable range no matter what grade they were climbing, when they were pulling heavy loads, or even just cruising on flatter roads. It was not about speed. It was about making it up or down the hill. It also had 2 reverse gears. It was first launched in 1928, and it hit just the right spot in the market. In fact, they sold nearly 50,000 of these in the first 2 years. For 1930, International upped its game again. They brought out a new line of trucks dubbed the A Series. They were a pretty significant upgrade from the popular S Series, which had come before. They had stronger frames, higher load capacities, and enhanced fuel efficiency, designed for heavy hauling during the challenging Depression era. All right, let's walk around and take a closer look at our International 6-speed, and we're going to start right here with this International logo, because this was not the original logo that International had. At this point, I think they started using this from the 1920s, say 1923, all the way through 1947. Then they transitioned to the one that a lot of folks are used to, that they grew up with, the I in the center and the H on either side. Which interestingly is actually similar to what the company very first started with. Today, well, it's got a much more modernized version of the logo. It's got kind of a diamond shape. Sometimes the word International is across the center, and then there's this I don't know, spear, peak, whatever you want to call it, comes through the center. Sometimes it's just the diamond and the peak going through. But the International logo has evolved over time, and I really like the looks of this one, though. It's very, very nice. And I also like the fact that the modern logo is actually very similar because of this diamond right here. Up on top, you'll see this thing. We got what's called a Boyce motometer. Now, it's missing its little rod that should go through the center that has mercury that tells you what the temperature is, but that's what this was designed to do. It was designed to allow the driver who's sitting up there to know what the temperature of the engine is. Boyce was a company, I think they patented these in 1912 and built them, I think, all the way through the 1920s. And it was a chance for the driver to have a clue as to what was going on within his engine. However, it wasn't perfect. And sometimes, you didn't see that thing come up and the temperature rise until it was just a little bit too late. So it could be just a little problematic. As you can see, it was very standard styling for its time. Big upright grille, simple hood covering over the engine, big lights, simple fenders on either side. You can really see the frame right here. Look how this big, huge, massive frame is coming forward, meeting this section right here, and then the semi-elliptical springs, which are going underneath right there. Big, strong pieces of metal. Simple beam front axle right there going off to either side. And there you see the brakes. And now these are mechanical brakes. They're not hydraulic. They're mechanical brakes, meaning if you're riding that brake pedal, you have to use a lot of effort to make that happen. Obviously not as good as what was going to come along, but once again, for its day, it was simple, and that was really important for people to be able to work on. Artillery-style wheels, which is what this is called. It doesn't have spokes or it doesn't have flat panels. The old traditional artillery-style wheel, plenty of lug nuts. Remember the lug nut rule. You don't want to hit anything that has more lug nuts than you, and this was a pretty substantial vehicle. Once again, very standard styling with the fenders right here. Big, huge slope going down, classic running board. This has a wooden body that I'm going to guess has been put on significantly later than when this truck was originally built. As I recall, back in those days, I think either this one or some of the larger internationals, you could get trucks that had stamped metal doors with wood inside. I'm unsure as to whether it came this way. It's very possible that this is the type of truck that would have been sold as a rolling chassis and people could add whatever bed they wanted onto here. As you can see now, well, it's been converted into a bit of a parade or a party truck with a couple of big, huge seats in the back. It's perfect for driving around in parades and that kind of thing. This one is also wearing the Texaco star. Remember Texaco, the oil company? I think it started back in 1902 in Texas. That's what it stands for, Texaco. More than 20 years ago, it was absorbed into Chevron. So Texaco, though, you can trust your car to the man who wears the star. There, of course, you see the big, huge semi-elliptical springs in the back. There's that 2-speed transmission. We'll try and get you a better picture of that in a little bit. Once again, I mentioned it's parades, perfect for hauling friends and having a good time. Who knows what this originally came with, but I guarantee it was something industrial, something meant for hauling things around. A little more modern taillights, although I think this is probably original or close to it back there. Once again, all designed to be an industrial vehicle. They weren't selling these to people who, simply wanted to, cruise around in a truck. Nobody wanted to do that back in those days. Whether it was a pickup truck or whether it was a big, huge 1-ton or even larger vehicle. Trucks were not mainstream vehicles. They were commercial vehicles. They existed for just one reason: hauling stuff. By the way, that 6-speed transmission is partly why international harvester trucks were selected for use in the construction of the Hoover Dam back in the early 30s. The work required vehicles that could operate continuously in extreme heat and steep grades over rough and unfinished roads while hauling heavy loads of materials, equipment, and water. All right, let's lift the hood on our 1930 International 6-speed. And the first thing I have to tell you is that while International built the truck, they did not build the engine. For that, they outsourced. They went to a company called the Waukesha Motor Company. It's based, of course, in Waukesha, Wisconsin. It was building engines, well, they built them since 1906, that were used in a wide variety of trucks and tractors, industrial uses. This truck, I believe, has the Waukesha XA gasoline-powered inline 4-cylinder engine. The XA used an L-head or flathead valve design and valve arrangement. That's where both the intake and the exhaust valves are located in the block alongside of the cylinders. The flathead design really favored steady torque delivery at low engine speeds, which was a key requirement for hauling loads rather than that high-speed driving that other folks were concerned about. The engine was built with a cast iron block and head, prioritizing durability and resistance to heat. It was designed to run over long periods under load at modest engine speeds, not going fast. The engine's characteristics really made this very well suited to the approach for this truck, where control and consistency mattered more than speed. By the way, Waukesha promoted its gas power fuel mixer that allowed their engines to run on a variety of fuels, which was perfect for a farmer who might not have a reliable source of gasoline. One other thing I like about this is the fact that I believe this has a system similar for cooling to what some of the early Model Ts were using, which is where there was no water pump. It's simply drawn into the radiator with the high temperature, goes up through the top, and then feeds back down in as it cools down. So as the hot water rises, it goes up. As it cools, it goes down. Once again, simpler, more basic, easier to work on for somebody, well, who just had industrial purposes in mind. Just want to climb underneath for a moment and show off our awesome Eaton 2-speed rear axle, which was so critical to the ability for this truck to haul the things it could haul, because this was the magic that made it happen. It took that 3-speed transmission and made it essentially into a 6-speed vehicle. A mechanical drive with that lever inside the cockpit, inside the driver compartment, if you want to call it that, coming all the way back here. And by the way, you probably noticed that we have this up on jack stands, but very simply, it's so that we don't wreck the tires, right? They sit here for a long time. Sometimes this one's not moving for a while. So putting it on jack stands means that we don't have to be concerned about the tires, flat spotting, that type of thing. But once again, this is the hero of the day, this Eaton 2-speed transmission, big, huge semi-elliptical springs in the back, big, strong frame that runs all the way through the underside of this. So this is really industrial purpose all the way. All right, let's step into the driver's compartment for our 1930 International 6-speed. And you didn't have to worry about, opening the doors in this thing. As I mentioned, I think it's very likely this could have been sold as simply a rolling chassis and people put whatever body they wanted on. There were plenty of companies that were making aftermarket bodies for a variety of vehicles, or some folks were simply making their own, whatever was simple. But this was all about, industrial purposes. Somebody was sitting here and they were hauling a load of something back there. Not a lot of room, not a lot of creature comfort. In fact, it's a very upright seating position. Big, huge steering wheel, because of course you didn't have power steering, so you needed the big steering wheel to muscle those wheels around. By now, they had gone to the classic 3-pedal configuration. So you've got a clutch on one side, a brake in the center, and a throttle over here. And then this button way over here, that is the starter. So to start the truck, first thing you would do, of course, is you would fiddle with these. You had a throttle and a retard for the ignition up here. So you set these the way you want them, and then you turn on, or what should I say, depress the starter over here. It would kick on, then you change your settings, and then you push in your clutch and head away. As I mentioned before, of course, this is a 3-speed transmission with, very importantly, the 2-speed rear axle. This was what was controlling the 2-speed rear axle. So you'd shift into one gear, and then you could control which aspect of the gear, whether it was low or high, with this lever right here. Simple gauges, look how tiny, look how small the speedometer is. This is referred to as a barrel speedometer. So you don't have a sweep hand. You don't see something going like this. It's literally spinning around because, let's face it, speed wasn't going to be very important. You probably weren't going very fast. You also had the odometer as well. This thing in the center, that's where you'd put the key in to start the ignition. This one right here would be the choke. It required a little more attention. It was getting easier to start these. Of course, we had no hand crank out front, but it was still fairly complicated in terms of the sequence of things you were going to do. Of course, remember choking the carburetor back then when it was cold. That's exactly what you had to do. And of course, you had ammeters and engine oil, but what you didn't have, these look like modern gauges. What you didn't have was the water temperature. I talked about that Boyce motometer. You would have to look out over the hood and see the Boyce motometer. But I go back to the point, once again, very simple, basic, not a comfortable driving position. Your legs are kind of crammed up here, seats kind of crammed up there. I'm sure somebody could probably build a more comfortable driving position. But they really weren't thinking about driver comfort back in those days. They were thinking about the industrial purpose of the vehicle. It wasn't about being comfortable. It was about what you could haul. International Harvester continued building serious trucks for serious people through the 30s. And like so many manufacturers, it then shifted to military production during World War II. After the war, of course, though, it went back to building trucks. But in 1953, it introduced the Travelall, a wagon-style, dare I say it, sport utility vehicle aimed at the civilian, non-commercial market. And in 1961, it launched the Scout, blazing the recreational SUV trail 5 years before the Bronco. And that Scout lasted until 1980. The Travelall era ended in 1975. International trucks, however, they continued. They evolved with stronger suspensions, higher payload capacities. The company still exists today, although now it's called International Motors. It's a subsidiary of Traton, which is the heavy vehicle division for Volkswagen. And that could possibly explain why the Scout name is coming back, supposedly on an electric vehicle produced by VW. But this 1930 International 6-speed helped to pave the way for all that. A truck that delivered exactly what people hauling heavy loads needed.